I was already tired when I turned onto our street. The kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and makes small hopes feel heavier than they should. My shift had dragged. A spilled coffee, a short register, a customer who insisted I smile more because it was my birthday. I had smiled. I always did. On my break, I bought myself a cupcake from the bakery case. Vanilla frosting, slightly melting. I told myself that was enough. A quiet celebration. Something small waiting for me when I got home. That was the picture in my head as I slowed the car and looked toward the house. At first, my brain didn't understand what it was seeing. Boxes on the porch weren't unusual. My parents liked to reorganize, purge, rearrange. But then I saw my jacket. The one with the torn pocket I kept meaning to sew. Then my backpack. Then my laptop bag. I parked crooked, half blocking the driveway, and just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. The engine was still running. I could hear it humming, steady and normal, like nothing was wrong. My heart wasn't racing yet. It was quiet. Too quiet. When I got out of the car, the air felt different. Colder. My cupcake slid on the passenger seat and tipped onto its side. I didn't fix it. Every box had my name written on it in my mom's handwriting. Neat. Careful. Like she'd taken her time. The front door opened before I could knock. My mom didn't look angry. That was the strange part. No red face. No crossed arms. She just looked done. Like this was a chore she'd already finished in her head. "You're not living here anymore," she said. No preface. No explanation. Just that. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. My dad stood behind her, one hand on the doorframe. He didn't look at me at first. He was staring past me, down the driveway, like he didn't want to see where this landed. "It's my birthday," I said. The words came out flat, like I was stating the weather. My mom nodded once. "We know." That was when my hands started shaking. I asked why. Not in a loud way. Not accusing. Just a question, like there might be a reasonable answer hiding somewhere between us. She said I was old enough to be on my own. That I'd been taking up space. That it was time they moved forward. Moved forward from what, she didn't say. My dad finally spoke. "This isn't a discussion." He said it calmly. Almost kindly. Like he was explaining a policy. I looked past them, into the house. The lights were on. Everything inside looked the same. The hallway runner. The family photos. The couch where I'd fallen asleep after double shifts. Nothing else was packed. Just me. There was no cake on the counter. No card. No awkward surprise waiting to soften the blow. The house had already closed its doors to me. I thought about arguing. About crying. About asking if we could at least talk about it tomorrow. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way my mom kept glancing at the boxes, not at me. Maybe it was the way my dad had already decided this moment was over. I realized then that whatever had led to this had already happened. I just hadn't been invited to know about it. So I didn't beg. I walked to the porch and started loading my things into the car. One box at a time. My mom stepped back inside. My dad stayed where he was, arms folded, watching like he was making sure I didn't forget anything. When I picked up the last box, I felt the weight of it pull down on my arms, and with it came a thought that landed hard and clear. If they could do this today, they had been planning it long before my birthday. I drove away without looking back. The cupcake slid again and finally tipped over completely, frosting smeared across the seat. I didn't clean it. I kept driving until the house disappeared from my mirror. At the first red light, I pulled over and turned the engine off. The silence inside the car felt louder than anything they'd said. That was the night I learned something important. They hadn't thrown me out because they were angry. They threw me out because they believed I had nothing left they needed. I slept in my car that first night. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I couldn't bring myself to ask anyone for help yet. I parked behind a grocery store I knew stayed open late, angled the seat back, and stared at the ceiling fabric until my eyes burned. The silence felt different away from my parents' house. Not heavy. Just empty. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Make sure you didn't forget anything. That was it. No, are you okay? No happy birthday. Just inventory control. I didn't reply. The next morning, I showered at a friend's place before she left for work. I told her it was temporary. I said it with enough confidence that she believed me. Or maybe she just didn't want to ask questions that might turn into something permanent. For the first few weeks, I became very good at shrinking myself. I learned how to fold my life into the smallest corners of other people's homes. One drawer here. One shelf there. I stopped cooking full meals because it felt rude to take up space in someone else's kitchen. I ate fast. Cleaned immediately. Said thank you too many times. At night, I lay awake replaying that moment on the porch. The way my mom said it so cleanly. The way my dad wouldn't meet my eyes. I kept wondering what I had missed. Some warning sign. Some final mistake that pushed them over the edge. But no matter how many times I rewound it, I came back to the same truth. They had decided who I was long before that night. Work became my anchor. Long shifts. Extra hours whenever I could get them. If I was tired enough, I didn't think as much. I saved every dollar that didn't have to go toward gas or food. I stopped buying things that didn't have a purpose. Comfort felt unnecessary. Survival didn't. A few months in, my dad sent a text. We're not cutting you off. You just need to learn responsibility. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone. That was when it clicked. This wasn't punishment. It was training. They thought struggle would shape me into something more acceptable. More useful. Something that might one day fit back into their house on their terms. So I made a quiet decision. If I was going to build a life, it wouldn't be one they could step back into when it suited them. I stopped sharing updates. Stopped posting. Stopped explaining myself to anyone who might pass information along. I became invisible on purpose. There's a strange kind of power in being underestimated. In knowing people have already written you off. Because when no one is watching, every small win belongs only to you. By the time I signed my first lease, a studio so small the bed touched the wall on both sides, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell my sister. I stood in the empty room alone, keys heavy in my palm, and felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't happiness yet. But it was mine. What I didn't know then was that the silence I'd created would make them curious. And curiosity, when mixed with entitlement, has a way of pulling people back into your life whether you invite them or not. They would come knocking eventually. Just not for the reason I expected. The studio smelled like fresh paint and old dust. The kind of place landlords fix just enough to call livable. I slept on a mattress on the floor for the first month, my boxes still taped shut like I might have to leave again any second. I kept the lights low at night. Not to save electricity, though I did that too, but because being seen still felt dangerous. Like visibility invited correction. Every paycheck went through the same routine. Rent first. Utilities second. Gas. Groceries. Whatever was left stayed untouched. I didn't trust comfort yet. Comfort had conditions. On my birthday the following year, my phone rang. My mom's name lit up the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text arrived. We were thinking of having dinner. Let us know if you're free. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an invitation like nothing had happened. I didn't respond. That was the first time I noticed the shift. Not in them, but in me. The guilt didn't land the way it used to. It hovered, then faded, like a sound from another room. Life stayed small for a while. Work. Home. Sleep. Repeat. I picked up a second job stocking shelves overnight. It paid less per hour, but it didn't require smiling. There's something honest about work that happens when most people are asleep. I learned which aches meant progress and which ones meant I was pushing too hard. I learned how to say no without explaining myself. I learned how to sit alone on a Friday night without feeling like I was being punished. And slowly, quietly, I started to stabilize. That was when my parents started asking questions. It began casually. My dad texting about the weather. My mom liking an old photo I'd posted months ago. My sister forwarding a job listing just in case. They were circling. One afternoon, my mom called while I was on break. I almost didn't answer. "You sound busy," she said, after I picked up. "I am." "Well, that's good," she replied. "We always said you'd land on your feet." There it was. They didn't see survival. They saw validation. Proof that their decision had been correct all along. I ended the call early and sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, breathing through the familiar burn behind my eyes. Not sadness this time. Anger. The quiet kind that doesn't explode, but sharpens. From that day on, I kept records. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Every message. Every call. Every casual comment about money, housing, family assets. I didn't know why yet. I just knew something about the way they spoke had changed. Like they were measuring me. And while they were watching from a distance, assuming they still held some claim over me, I was building something they couldn't see. Piece by piece. Signature by signature. By the time I walked into a bank for the first time and sat across from a loan officer, I didn't feel like an imposter anymore. I felt prepared. I didn't tell my parents then either. I let them keep thinking I was still figuring things out. Because people behave very differently when they believe you still need them. The loan officer didn't smile much. That helped. She looked at my paperwork the way someone looks at facts, without emotion, without judgment. I slid everything across the desk slowly, afraid that if I rushed, it would all disappear. Pay stubs. Tax returns. Saving statements I'd built dollar by dollar. She tapped a pen against the folder. "You've been consistent," she said. "That matters more than people think." I nodded, pretending my heart wasn't trying to punch its way out of my chest. When I walked back to my car, the sun felt different. Not brighter. Quieter. Like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. I didn't tell anyone what I was trying to do. Not coworkers. Not friends. Definitely not my family. This wasn't a dream I wanted opinions on. Opinions had a way of shrinking things. House hunting happened in short windows between shifts. I learned the language fast, what cozy really meant, how a potential usually translated to work no one wanted to do. I walked through places with cracked tiles, peeling paint, yards that hadn't been touched in years. And then there was this one. Small. Nothing impressive. But solid. The floors were scratched, the cabinets outdated, the backyard overgrown. Still, when I stood in the empty living room, I felt something settle in my chest. Not excitement. Certainty. The offer process was slow. Paperwork stacked on paperwork. More waiting. More silence. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be my parents somehow sensing what I was doing. Instead, the call came on a Wednesday morning while I was halfway through folding laundry. "Congratulations," the agent said. "You're clear to close." I sat on the floor with a sock in my hand and laughed once. Just once. Like letting air out of a tire. Closing day was quiet. No one came with me. No photos. No announcement. I signed my name until my wrist ached, then held a single key that felt heavier than it looked. The first night I slept there, I left the lights on. Every room. I wanted proof I could exist fully without permission. It took months to make the place feel like mine. I painted on weekends, ate dinner sitting on the floor, fixed things slowly instead of all at once. I learned which sounds were normal and which meant something needed attention. I learned the house. And the house learned me. That's when my parents started talking differently. My mom asked where I was living now. My dad mentioned property values of these days. My sister joked that I'd probably end up back home eventually, said it like she was comforting herself. I never corrected them. Because something had shifted again. Not just in me, but in what I represented to them. I wasn't the problem child anymore. I was becoming an asset. And the day they finally saw the house in person, the way my mom walked through the rooms told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't visiting. She was assessing. That was the moment I understood this wasn't over yet. Not even close. They didn't come all at once. First it was my mom, stopping by just to see it again, bringing nothing but questions. How much I paid. What the interest rate was. Whether the neighborhood was up and coming. She touched the walls the way people do in houses they think they'll outgrow, already imagining changes. My dad came later. Walked the perimeter. Checked the fence. Commented on the roof like he might need to replace it someday. He didn't say congratulations. He said, "You did okay." That was the closest he ever got. I kept things polite. Neutral. I answered what I had to and nothing more. I'd learned that information was currency in our family, and I was done spending mine for free. The language changed after that. It wasn't your house anymore. It was the house. Then our place. Then, casually, the family property. The words slid into conversations like they'd always belonged there. One afternoon, my mom sat at my kitchen table flipping through a stack of mail I hadn't asked her to touch. She held up a utility bill and said, "You know, if anything ever happened to you, this would obviously stay in the family." I stared at the sink instead of her. What does that mean? She smiled like I was being silly. It means we look out for our own. The same people who boxed my life up on my birthday. I started noticing how often they dropped by without calling. How my sister began hinting about staying over if things ever got tight. How my dad mentioned refinancing options he'd heard about. They never asked how I was doing. They asked how the house was holding up. One night, my mom said it outright. "You know," she said, leaning back in her chair, "this place really belongs to all of us. We sacrificed a lot raising you." There it was. The invoice. Years late, but apparently still collectible. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "This house is in my name." She waved a hand. Paperwork isn't the same as reality. That sentence stayed with me. Because it told me everything. They didn't see this as overstepping. They saw it as delayed ownership. Like my success was a storage unit they'd forgotten about and finally remembered the code to. That night, after they left, I sat in the dark living room and listened to the house settle. Pipes ticking. Wood shifting. All the small sounds of something alive. And I realized something else. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because I had something they wanted. So I stopped explaining. I stopped correcting. And quietly, without telling them, I started preparing. Because if they thought this house was family, they were about to learn what that word really costs. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I didn't even change how I spoke to them. That's the mistake people like my parents make. They think silence means weakness. They think calm means agreement. In reality, silence gave me room. I started with documents. The boring things no one ever cares about until it's too late. Deed. Mortgage. Title insurance. Every signature. Every date. I read them at my kitchen table late at night, highlighter in hand, learning the language that decides who owns what when emotions don't matter. I remembered something my dad once said, years ago, when I was still living under their roof. Paper is the only thing that tells the truth. He didn't realize how right he was. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer using my lunch break. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I sat in a small office that smelled like coffee and old carpet and explained everything calmly, like it was someone else's story. The lawyer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "You're right to be proactive." That word again. Proactive. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just prepared. She explained things plainly. What they could try. What they couldn't. How entitlement often masquerades as family concern. How assumptions don't hold up in court. When I left, I felt lighter, not relieved, exactly, but steadier. Like I'd moved from reacting to standing still while things came toward me. At home, my parents kept pushing, gently at first. My mom suggested renovations we could all chip in for. My dad talked about tax advantages, if things were structured differently. My sister joked about how funny it would be if we all lived together again. I smiled. I nodded. I said I'd think about it. And then I did something they never expected. I set boundaries without announcing them. I stopped letting them come over uninvited. I stopped answering questions about money. I stopped explaining my decisions. When my mom asked why I was being distant, I said, "I'm busy." Which was true. Just not in the way she meant. The first real crack showed on a Sunday afternoon when my dad tried to bring a contractor over without asking. I opened the door, saw the man behind him, and said calmly, "This isn't a good time." My dad's face tightened. "We drove all the way over. I didn't invite you." The air shifted. Not loud. Just different. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "We need to talk about the house." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "We can talk." With a mediator. There was a long pause before she answered. "Why are you being like this? We're family." I didn't respond. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Family wasn't something they offered me. It was something they used when it benefited them. And soon, they were going to realize that leverage works both ways. They didn't like the word mediator. It stripped the warmth off their assumptions and left everything exposed. A week passed. Then another. The messages shifted from confused to irritated. My dad called twice and left voicemails that sounded calm on the surface but sharp underneath. My mom sent paragraphs dressed up as concern, each one circling the same point. "We just want what's fair. This is how families do things. You wouldn't even have this if it weren't for us." The third week, they showed up anyway. I was watering the front yard when their car pulled up. No warning. No call. My sister stepped out first, arms crossed, already rehearsed. My parents followed, expressions tight but controlled. My mom didn't waste time. "We need to settle this." I turned the hose off slowly. "There's nothing to settle." My dad stepped forward. "Don't do this, Natalie. You're acting like this house fell from the sky." I looked at all three of them standing on my lawn and felt something unexpected. Nothing. No anger. No fear. Just distance. My mom sighed dramatically. "We're not asking for much. This should be a family asset. That's how we raised you, to contribute." "That's not how you raised me," I said quietly. She flinched, just slightly. My sister jumped in. "So what, you think you're better than us now?" I shook my head. "I think I'm responsible for what's mine." That's when my dad said the sentence they'd been circling for months. "If you don't agree to put our names on the house," he said, "we'll have to take legal steps." There it was. Not concern. Not pride. Ownership. I nodded once. Okay. That word surprised them. My mom blinked. Okay, what? Okay, I repeated. Do what you need to do. They stood there, waiting for me to panic. To argue. To beg them not to. I didn't. Because what they didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was that I'd already done everything I needed to do. The lawyer had been clear. Their case was built on emotion and entitlement. Mine was built on records. They left angry that day. Confused. Offended that I hadn't reacted the way they expected. 2 weeks later, I was served papers. And 2 weeks after that, they realized something had gone very wrong. The hearing was short. No raised voices. No speeches. Just facts laid out cleanly. My parents' claims dissolved under basic questions they couldn't answer. Contributions they couldn't prove. Rights they assumed but never had. The judge didn't look at me much. She didn't need to. She looked at them when she said, "This property is not a family asset. It belongs solely to Ms. Natalie Brooks." My mom's face drained of color. My dad stared at the table like it might offer him a way out. My sister didn't say a word. Outside the courthouse, they waited for me to say something. I didn't. I walked past them, got into my car, and drove home to a house that had never belonged to anyone else. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Because the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. And that was the last time they ever tried to claim what they gave up the day they put my life on the porch and told me I was done. The house felt different after that. Not bigger. Not newer. Just settled. I walked through it slowly the night I got back from the courthouse. Same creaky floorboard near the hallway. Same light switch that sometimes needed a second try. Same cheap blinds I kept meaning to replace. But for the first time, nothing in it felt borrowed. I made dinner for one. Nothing fancy. Pasta from a box, sauce from a jar. I ate standing at the counter because I hadn't bought a dining table yet. I realized I didn't feel embarrassed about that anymore. There was no audience left to impress. My phone stayed quiet. No apologies. No angry follow-ups. No sudden warmth now that the door was fully closed. That silence told me everything. A few weeks later, my birthday came again. I took the day off work. Bought myself a small cake from the same grocery store bakery. The kind with too much frosting and my name spelled right this time. I ate it slowly, one slice at a time, sitting on the floor of my living room. I thought about the girl who had driven away years earlier with her life stuffed into boxes. The one who thought silence meant weakness. The one who believed being wanted was something she had to earn. She didn't disappear. She just grew up. My parents never came back to that house. They never asked again. Not because they understood, but because they couldn't pretend anymore. What surprised me most wasn't losing them. It was realizing how light everything felt without them. I didn't win anything dramatic. I didn't prove anything out loud. I didn't need to. I kept the house. I kept my name clean. I kept my peace. And for the first time, when someone said family, I knew exactly what I would never give away again. If the people who raised you walk away when you need them most, are they still entitled to what you build after they're gone?